The first time I heard the whispers, I thought it was the wind. But wind doesn't carry words, and it sure as hell doesn't know your name. I've been a gravedigger at Blackthorn Cemetery for nearly 40 years. You'd think I'd be used to the quiet, the way the trees creak, the distant hoot of an owl. But that night, something was different. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic, like old coins or blood. It started with the shadows. They stretched too long, too thin, like fingers reaching out from the graves. I'd see them out of the corner of my eye, darting between the headstones, always just out of sight when I turned to look. And then, the whispers. Soft at first, like the rustle of leaves, but growing louder, clearer. They called my name. Not in a shout, not even in a voice you could pinpoint, but in a murmur that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I tried to ignore it. Chalked it up to my imagination, to the long hours and the loneliness of the job. But then, the graves started to change. Not all of them, just a few. The earth would be disturbed, not like animals had been digging, but like something had pushed its way out from underneath. And the headstones, some of them would be warm to the touch, like they'd been sitting under the sun for hours, even in the dead of night. One evening, I was working late, filling in a grave for old Mrs. Hargrove. She'd been a fixture in town, and half the village showed up for her funeral. I was smoothing out the last of the dirt when I heard it, a thump, like something hitting the inside of the coffin lid. I froze, my hands shaking, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Then, another thump. And another. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw it, a crack in the earth, snaking its way from the grave to the old oak tree at the edge of the cemetery. I should have run. I should have left right then and there. But something pulled me toward that tree, toward the darkness that seemed to pulse and writhe beneath its roots. And then, I saw the figure, a man, or what looked like a man, standing just beyond the reach of my lantern's light. He was tall, too tall, his limbs stretched out like branches, his eyes reflecting the dim glow of the moon. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, watching me. And then, he smiled. That's when I knew. Something was very, very wrong at Blackthorn Cemetery. And it wasn't just the dead that I had to worry about. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent my heart racing. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, just the usual sounds of the cemetery at night. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something was out there, something that knew me, that called to me. I started noticing things, small things at first. Tools would go missing, only to reappear in places I'd already searched. The locks on the cemetery gates would be undone, even though I knew I'd secured them the night before. And the whispers, they never stopped. They followed me, a constant murmur just beyond my hearing, like a radio tuned to a station just out of reach. One evening, as I was preparing to leave, I saw a figure standing by the old mausoleum. It was a woman, dressed in a long, tattered gown, her hair wild and tangled. She was just standing there, staring at me. I called out to her, asked if she needed help, but she didn't respond. She just kept staring, her eyes dark and hollow. And then, she smiled, a slow, creeping smile that sent a chill down my spine. I turned to leave, my hands shaking, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. But as I walked away, I could feel her eyes on me, boring into my back. And then, I heard her voice, a whisper, soft and cold, like the touch of a corpse. "You see us," she said. "You hear us. You know we're here." I didn't look back. I didn't want to see her, didn't want to know what she was, what she wanted. I just kept walking, my footsteps echoing in the empty cemetery. But as I reached the gates, I heard it, a sound like 1,000 voices, all whispering at once, a cacophony of words that I couldn't understand. And then, the ground beneath me trembled. The headstones shook, the earth split open, and from the cracks, hands emerged, pale, skeletal hands, reaching out, grasping at the air. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw them, the figures, dozens of them, emerging from the graves, their eyes fixed on me. I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I was far away from the cemetery, far away from the things that waited there. But even as I sat in my kitchen, my hands still shaking, I knew it wasn't over. They knew me. They saw me. And they weren't going to let me go. The next few days were a blur. I barely slept, barely ate. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, the figures, the hands reaching out from the graves, the hollow eyes of the woman by the mausoleum. I knew I had to do something, had to find a way to make it stop. But what could I do against something that wasn't even alive? I decided to go back to the cemetery, to face whatever was there. I armed myself with a shovel and a crucifix, not sure if either would do any good but desperate for some semblance of protection. The air was thick with tension as I stepped through the gates, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. I made my way to the old oak tree, the epicenter of the disturbances. The ground around it was torn up, as if something had clawed its way out from beneath the roots. And there, standing in the shadows, was the tall figure I had seen before. His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a wave of cold wash over me. "You see us," he said, his voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "You hear us. You know our pain." I wanted to run, to turn and flee from the cemetery and never look back. But something held me there, a force I couldn't resist. And then, the figures emerged from the graves, their forms flickering like shadows in the moonlight. They surrounded me, their voices a chorus of whispers, their eyes filled with a sorrow so deep it made my heart ache. "We are trapped," the tall figure said. "Bound to this place, to our pain. But you can see us. You can hear us. You can set us free." I didn't understand, didn't know what he was asking of me. But as I looked into his eyes, I felt a connection, a shared sorrow that transcended the boundary between the living and the dead. And I knew, in that moment, that I couldn't turn away. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the figure's outstretched hand. A jolt of cold ran through me, and suddenly, I was flooded with images, memories, not my own, but theirs. I saw their lives, their deaths, the pain and sorrow that had bound them to this place. And I understood. With tears streaming down my face, I whispered the words they needed to hear. Words of release, of forgiveness, of peace. The figures began to fade, their forms dissolving like mist in the morning sun. The whispers grew softer, the air lighter, until finally, there was silence. The cemetery was still once more, the shadows retreating, the earth settling. I stood there, my heart heavy with the weight of what I had seen, what I had done. And as I turned to leave, I knew that I would never be the same. But as I reached the gates, I heard it, one last whisper, carried on the wind. A single word, a name. My name. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it wasn't over. They were free, but something else remained. Something that still watched, still waited. And it knew me. The rain was falling in sheets the day we buried my uncle. It was one of those cold, relentless downpours that seemed to seep into your bones, making everything feel heavier, sadder. I stood under the black umbrella, watching as the casket was lowered into the ground. The priest's words were a blur, drowned out by the sound of the rain and the distant rumble of thunder. I had never been good with goodbyes. My uncle had been more than family, he had been a friend, a mentor. And now, he was gone. I felt a lump rise in my throat, a tightness in my chest that made it hard to breathe. But as I stood there, surrounded by the somber faces of family and friends, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It started with a whisper, a soft rustle of leaves that seemed out of place amidst the rain. I looked around, my eyes scanning the cemetery, but saw nothing. Just the gray headstones, the bare trees, the mourners huddled under their umbrellas. But then, I saw him, a man standing at the edge of the crowd, his face obscured by a dark hood. He wasn't like the others. He didn't hold an umbrella, didn't seem to notice the rain. He just stood there, his eyes fixed on the casket, a slight smile playing on his lips. I felt a chill run down my spine, a sense of unease that I couldn't explain. Who was he? Why was he here? As the service ended and the mourners began to disperse, I kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching. And then, as if sensing my gaze, he turned his head and looked directly at me. His eyes were dark, hollow, like empty sockets in a skull. And that smile, it was cold, cruel, like the grin of a predator. I tore my gaze away, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to leave, to get as far away from him as possible. But as I turned to go, I heard it, a whisper, soft and cold, like the touch of a corpse. "You see me," he said. "You know I'm here." I didn't look back. I didn't want to see him, didn't want to know what he was, what he wanted. I just kept walking, my footsteps splashing in the puddles, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. But as I reached the cemetery gates, I felt it, a presence, a shadow, just behind me. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he was following me. I spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. The stress of the funeral, the grief, the lack of sleep, it all must have been playing tricks on my mind. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard it again, the whisper. It was softer this time, barely audible, but it was there, just beyond the edge of my hearing. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest, and listened. The house was silent, the only sound the gentle hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the distant ticking of the clock in the hallway. And then, I saw it. A shadow, moving across the wall. It was faint at first, barely more than a smudge in the darkness. But as I watched, it grew darker, more defined, taking on the shape of a man. The same man I had seen at the cemetery, his hooded figure standing just beyond the reach of the light. I wanted to scream, to call out for help, but my voice caught in my throat. I was paralyzed, trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. The shadow moved closer, its form flickering like a candle flame in the wind. And then, it spoke. "You can't escape me," it said, its voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "I am always with you, always watching." I tore my gaze away, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I knew I had to do something, had to find a way to make it stop. But what could I do against something that wasn't even real? Against a shadow that seemed to feed on my fear? I spent the rest of the night huddled under the covers, my eyes wide open, my ears straining for the slightest sound. And as the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, I made a decision. I had to go back to the cemetery, had to face whatever was haunting me. I had to find out what it wanted. I dressed quickly, my hands shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. The streets were empty as I made my way through the town, the early morning light casting long, eerie shadows across the pavement. And as I reached the cemetery gates, I felt it, a presence, a shadow, just behind me. The same cold, hollow feeling that had followed me since the funeral. I turned, my breath catching in my throat, and saw him, the man in the hood, his eyes dark and hollow, his smile cold and cruel. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he wasn't going to let me go. Not until he got what he wanted. I stood at the cemetery gates, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath visible in the cold morning air. The man in the hood stood just a few feet away, his dark eyes fixed on me, his smile as cold and cruel as ever. I wanted to run, to turn and flee from the cemetery and never look back. But I knew I couldn't. I had to face him, had to find out what he wanted. "You've been following me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why? What do you want from me?" The man didn't answer at first. He just stood there, his eyes never leaving mine, his smile never wavering. And then, he spoke. "I want what was taken from me," he said, his voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "I want justice." I frowned, confusion and fear warring within me. "Justice? What are you talking about?" The man took a step closer, his shadow stretching out behind him like a dark, twisted reflection. "Your uncle," he said. "He took something from me, something precious. And now, I want it back." I shook my head, my mind racing. "I don't understand. My uncle was a good man. He would never." But even as I spoke, a memory surfaced. A conversation I had overheard, a whispered argument between my uncle and a man I didn't recognize. They had been talking about a deal, about something that had gone wrong. And then, the man had stormed out, his face twisted in anger, his eyes filled with a cold, hard promise. "You know," the man said, his voice soft, insistent. "You've always known. And now, it's time to make things right." I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, that my uncle would never do something like that. But the memory was there, clear and vivid, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he was telling the truth. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled, his eyes dark and hollow. "I want you to find it," he said. "I want you to find what your uncle took from me and return it to its rightful place. And then, and only then, will I be free." I nodded, my mind made up. I would do it. I would find what my uncle had taken and return it, no matter the cost. And as I turned to leave, I felt it, a presence, a shadow, just behind me. But this time, it didn't fill me with fear. It filled me with determination, with a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in a long time. I knew what I had to do. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I wouldn't stop until it was done.
The air was crisp and cold as I walked through the wrought iron gates of Willowbrook Cemetery. It had been a year since I lost my husband, and yet, the pain was as fresh as ever. I clutched a bouquet of his favorite flowers, white lilies, my heart heavy with memories. The cemetery was quiet, the only sound the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant chirp of birds. I made my way to his grave, my footsteps slow and deliberate. As I knelt to place the flowers on the headstone, I heard a soft, muffled sob. I looked around, my eyes scanning the cemetery, but saw no one. The sob came again, louder this time, and I realized it was coming from behind a large, ornate mausoleum. Curious, I stood and walked toward the sound. As I rounded the corner, I saw him, a small boy, no older than 5, his cheeks streaked with tears, his clothes dirty and torn. He was huddled against the cold stone, his arms wrapped around his knees, his eyes wide with fear. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice soft, gentle. "What are you doing here all alone?" The boy looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears. "I can't find my mommy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was playing, and then I got lost. I can't find her anywhere." My heart went out to him. I knelt down, my eyes level with his, and smiled. "It's okay," I said. "I'll help you find her." "What's your name?" The boy sniffed, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. "Tommy," he said. "My name is Tommy." I took his hand, his small fingers cold and trembling in mine. "Come on, Tommy," I said. "Let's find your mommy." We walked through the cemetery, my eyes scanning the headstones, the paths, the distant figures of other visitors. But no one seemed to be looking for a lost child. No one seemed to notice us at all. As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the graves, I felt a sense of unease settle over me. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. And then, Tommy looked up at me, his eyes dark and hollow, his smile cold and cruel. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he wasn't who he seemed to be. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the cemetery took on an eerie glow, the shadows stretching long and dark between the headstones. Tommy's hand was still cold in mine, his small fingers trembling. I tried to ignore the unease gnawing at the back of my mind, the feeling that something was terribly wrong. "We should find someone who can help," I said, my voice steady despite the fear creeping into my heart. "There must be a caretaker or a guard around here somewhere." Tommy didn't respond. He just looked up at me with those dark, hollow eyes, his expression unreadable. We walked in silence, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath our feet and the distant hoot of an owl. As we rounded a corner, I saw a small, dilapidated building nestled among the trees. A dim light flickered in the window, and I felt a surge of hope. Someone was there. Someone who could help. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding in my chest. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing an old man with a weathered face and kind eyes. He looked down at Tommy, his eyebrows furrowing in confusion. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gruff but gentle. "I found this little boy wandering around the cemetery," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "He's lost, and I can't find his parents. Can you help us?" The old man's eyes widened in surprise. He looked down at Tommy, then back up at me, his expression puzzled. "I don't see any boy," he said. "Are you sure you're okay, miss?" I frowned, my confusion growing. "He's right here," I said, gesturing to Tommy. "He said his name is Tommy. He's lost, and he needs help." The old man shook his head, his eyes never leaving mine. "I'm sorry, miss," he said. "But there's no one there. You're all alone." I looked down at Tommy, my heart pounding in my chest. He was still there, his hand still cold in mine, his eyes still dark and hollow. But as I looked back up at the old man, I saw it, the fear in his eyes, the way he stepped back, his hand reaching for the door. And then, Tommy smiled, a cold, cruel smile that sent a chill down my spine. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that something was very, very wrong. I stumbled back from the old man's door, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing. Tommy's hand was still cold in mine, but his grip had tightened, his small fingers digging into my skin. I looked down at him, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps, and saw that his eyes were no longer filled with tears. They were dark, hollow, like empty sockets in a skull. "You see me," Tommy said, his voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "You know I'm here." I wanted to run, to scream, to tear my hand away from his and flee into the night. But I was frozen, trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. The old man's door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the cemetery like a gunshot, and I was alone with Tommy, with whatever he was. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" Tommy smiled, his lips curling into a cold, cruel grin. "I want what was taken from me," he said. "I want to be found." I shook my head, my confusion and fear growing with each passing second. "I don't understand," I said. "What was taken from you?" "What do you mean, you want to be found?" Tommy's grip tightened, his fingers digging into my skin like claws. "I was lost," he said. "Just like you. But no one ever came for me. No one ever looked." I felt a chill run down my spine, a sense of dread washing over me like a wave. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tommy looked up at me, his eyes dark and hollow, his smile cold and cruel. "I died here," he said. "A long time ago. And no one ever knew." I felt the world spin around me, the ground tilting beneath my feet. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, that he was just a lost child who needed help. But the memory of the old man's words echoed in my mind, the fear in his eyes, the way he had looked at me as if I were crazy. "You're not real," I said, my voice trembling. "You can't be." Tommy's smile widened, his eyes never leaving mine. "I'm as real as you are," he said. "And now, you see me. You know I'm here." I tore my hand away from his, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing through the cemetery like a drumbeat, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I was far away from the cemetery, far away from Tommy and whatever he was. But as I sat in my car, my hands shaking, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps, I knew it wasn't over. I had seen him. I had heard him. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he wasn't going to let me go. The next day, I returned to the cemetery, my heart heavy with dread. I found the old man and asked him about Tommy, about the lost child I had seen the night before. He looked at me with kind eyes, his expression gentle, and shook his head. "There's no child here," he said. "No one has been lost in a long, long time." I wanted to believe him, to tell myself that it had all been a dream, a figment of my imagination. But as I walked through the cemetery, my eyes scanning the headstones, the paths, the distant figures of other visitors, I knew the truth. Tommy was real. And he was still here, waiting to be found,